Okay, hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Marina, and just a little bit about me is that I've always been on the fence on this topic, but I've been witness to some pretty heated debates about it, so I had to get down to it and figure out what's the deal with dairy. So we were always raised as kids to think that we should always drink milk to be strong and healthy, but I've heard otherwise, and I wanted to know where these concepts were coming from. So that's why today my major claim is that the recommended consumption of dairy products is not beneficial to human health. And by regular consumption, I mean my plate's recommended amount of 3 cups per day. And for my supporting claims, I'll state that dairy consumption is linked to various diseases, that dairy consumption increases the risk of exposure to potential contaminants, and that the consumption of milk beyond the weaning stage is unnecessary and likely harmful. So to go into my first point, that dairy consumption is linked to various diseases, I'd first like to go into cardiovascular disease. So the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine states that dairy products, including but not limited to milk, cheese, ice cream, butter, and yogurt, contributes to significant amounts of cholesterol and saturated fat into the diet. And so diets high in fat and saturated fat increase the risk of heart disease, such as heart failure and cardiac arrest. So next would be cancer. Prostate cancer and ovarian cancer. Prostate, breast, and ovarian cancer has been linked to the consumption of dairy products. The Medical Journal of Cancer Epidemiology, Biomarkers and Prevention has found this to be due to the compound called insulin growth factor 1, or IGF-1, in cow's milk. In a study conducted by the National Cancer Institute, they found that men with higher levels of IGF-1 had more than 4 times the risk of prostate cancer than those with lower markers. Research also suggests that the dairy sugar, galactose, might also be toxic to ovarian cells. So a study by the American Journal of Clinical Health found that the consumption of lactose and dairy products was positively linked to ovarian cancer, and that women who consumed more than 1 glass of milk per day had 73% more greater chance of ovarian cancer than women who drank less than 1 glass of milk per day. So, in my second supporting claim, I'd like to point that dairy consumption increases the risk of exposure to potential contaminants. And first would be antibiotics. And here's how it works. So, milk naturally contains hormones and growth factors within a cow's body. But in addition, synthetic hormones such as reincumbent bovine growth hormones, or RBGH, are commonly used to increase the production of milk. Because treated cows are producing milk at a very unnatural rate of about 300 days a year, the consequences can lead to the inflammation or swelling of the udders and other various complications. So the use of antibiotics are needed to treat these symptoms and others alike. And so, since the drugs are running through their systems, traces of antibiotics are found in milk, which is consumed by humans. And next would be pesticides. So pesticides take a similar path into the milk source. Instead of being injected into the cow's bodies, they are ingested from the food supply, and the toxins are then found in their milk. So although the quantities of antibiotics and pesticide chemicals found in milk may be relatively minimal, that when ingested, these toxins do not readily leave the human body and can eventually lead to harmful levels that may affect the immune and reproductive systems. So for my third and final supporting claim, I like to point that the consumption of milk beyond the weaning stage is unnecessary and potentially harmful. And this is due to the decrease in lactase production. So during the weaning stage of humans, or the weaning stage of development in humans, from birth to about age 5, the consumption of milk is crucial, and thus the production of lactase, which is the enzyme that catalyzes the breakdown of lactose into glucose and galactose, but is simply just the process that takes milk and turns it into sugar, is released at plentiful rates. But as we grow older, the production of lactase decreases, resulting in lactose intolerance. Studies have shown that roughly 75% of the world is lactose intolerant, and so this means that dairy consumption is not beneficial to about 3/4 of the human population. And so, in conclusion, I have made the claim that the recommended consumption of dairy products is not beneficial to human health by stating that dairy consumption is linked to various diseases, such as cardiovascular disease and cancer, and that dairy consumption increases the risk of exposure to potential contaminants, such as antibiotic drugs and pesticides, and that the consumption of milk beyond the weaning stage is unnecessary and likely harmful due to the decrease of lactase production. And this concludes my argument. Thank you for your time.
Excuse me. Well, let's start with the body of the argument, and we'll talk about the introduction and the structural stuff at the end. I thought that internally the signposts were pretty clear. The link to diseases on the first point is you've got one quote that talks about high-fat diets, high-fat content, and there's a slight connection to dairy there, but it's not a very clear connection, so I think you need a little bit better information on that particular point. The cancer link, I think, is a little bit stronger because of the IGF-1 issue that you're talking about. But even then, the connection between that and the prostate cancer needs to be developed a little bit more. That seemed to be like the only thing. And then there's a discussion of ovarian cancer also, the risk factors. You do say at one point that the risk factors seem relatively low, but actually you said that about the amount that's in the foods that we eat, that's low, but it's accumulation that could produce these particular harms. And there's not really much explanation about how much exposure you have to have on either the cholesterol issue or the cancer issue to be at risk. The one study that does mention something is that women who have a glass of milk a day after that particular age have a 78% increase in risk of ovarian cancer. So that was the one that gave us the clearest link on that. The third point I thought was explained very nicely. The material on lactose intolerance is pretty standard stuff. When you say 75% of the world is largely lactose intolerant, the truth of the matter is that we're kind of shying away from that. That mostly is a ethnicity issue. Certain ethnic groups are excluded from the same sort of thing because their bodies don't produce the same kinds of enzymes that you need to be lactose tolerant. And so some groups might be excluded, but that necessarily doesn't apply to other groups. And maybe we're a little hesitant to point to one group and say, well, sorry that you can't have milk and ice cream and cheese because you fit into this particular category. So I think that's a big generalization that you're using there. And by the way, whoever's responding to this, there are issues that address lactose intolerance, so you might want to look at that as a potential answer there. The second point on exposure to the contaminants is the point that I think is the thinnest. I thought your first point was okay. It needs a little bit better links on a couple of things. And the third point, the data is solid. We know what you're talking about there. But the third point seems to make a lot of assumptions about pesticides being ingested or trace amounts of the antibiotics without telling us that there's any harm that occurs as a result of that. So I think that that's missing on that link. All right, now, the beginning of the speech, the structural stuff is good. There's controversy at the beginning. The proposition is phrased inappropriately. You've got the negative term in there, so that's one of those things that you'd want to rephrase. Like I said, at the end of the speech, I'm listening to all the evidence and looking at it and say, I think you did a nice job putting together a general argument, but you need to sell a couple of those points a little bit more, and that second point especially needs more information. But it's also nicely presented. I thought you had an excellent summary at the end of the speech. Thank you.